A single wrong turn could reroute the flow of empires. Ancient merchants, guided by flawed maps and mistaken ideas, did not just lose their way, they accidentally opened new continents to trade. This journey uncovers 25 pivotal geographic miscalculations that fundamentally redirected ancient trade routes, reshaping economies and cultures forever. You will discover how errors in judgment about distance, terrain, and ocean currents led to unexpected discoveries and forged lasting global connections. How did a phantom oasis in the Sahara create a gold road, and what misplaced kingdom drove explorers across the world? Are we truly in control of our destiny, or is history shaped by our most glorious mistakes? That single navigational error opened a sea road to the north, but another kind of miscalculation was unfolding under the scorching sun of the Sahara. The second great error was the phantom oasis of the Garamantes. Deep in the Libyan desert, the Garamantian civilization thrived by tapping vast fossil water reserves with an intricate system of tunnels, creating a man-made paradise. To distant empires like Rome, this green heart of the desert was a legend, a mirage of unimaginable wealth. Their maps and traders' tales consistently misjudged its location, placing it dozens of leagues closer than it truly was. Caravans, lured by the promise of a shorter, safer journey through the dunes, would set out with extra trade goods but insufficient water, betting on reaching this misplaced refuge. They often found themselves lost and desperate, forced to trade their precious cargo for mere survival with the true masters of the desert, the Berber tribes who knew the land's real secrets. This recurring geographic error did not destroy trade, it accidentally forged it. The Berbers, now flush with goods meant for the Garamantes, established themselves as the indispensable middlemen of the Sahara. A trade network meant to bypass them instead made them wealthy, channeling gold, salt, and slaves along routes that their navigational wisdom controlled. The phantom on the map created a very real road of gold, proving that a mistake in the sand could be as profitable as a mistake at sea. Roman maps were filled with phantom lakes and forests deep in the Sahara, mirages drawn in ink. Cartographers in distant cities, relying on the exaggerated tales of a few returning merchants, sketched vast, hospitable oases where only endless dunes actually stood. A caravan trusting these charts would set out with hope, only to find its water supplies dwindling and the promised refuge nowhere in sight. Survival then demanded a desperate turn south, into lands the maps declared barren. This was the critical error, a life-or-death miscalculation that forced traders to become explorers. Their unintended paths did not lead to ruin, but to the thriving kingdoms of West Africa. Suddenly, these lost merchants found themselves face to face with empires of gold and ivory, who in turn craved the one thing the desert held in unimaginable abundance: salt. The very mistake that nearly killed the trade routes gave them a monumental new purpose. Gold flowed north, salt flowed south, and the legendary Trans-Saharan trade network was born from a cartographic fantasy. A simple error in distance and description wove West Africa permanently into the tapestry of the ancient world, proving that a mistake on parchment could build roads of unimaginable wealth across the sand. Even the greatest rivers are never truly still. The Harappan civilization built a magnificent network of cities along the mighty Indus, their entire society and its booming trade routes anchored to its life-giving waters. For generations, this seemed like a perfect, permanent arrangement, but the land itself was shifting in ways they could not perceive. The river was slowly, inexorably moving eastward. Year after year, silt carried from the mountains built up on the riverbed, raising its level and forcing the water to seek new, lower paths. Deep underground, tectonic pressures subtly tilted the vast plain, further encouraging the Indus to change its course. The Harappans, masters of urban planning and trade, made a critical miscalculation. They failed to anticipate that their geographic anchor was, in fact, a drifting compass. Their great cities, like Mohenjo-Daro, were gradually left high and dry, their bustling ports now isolated from the water that gave them purpose. Stranded merchants had no choice but to adapt. They forged new trails through dense forests and across dry riverbeds, pushing eastward toward the one place they knew water still flowed abundantly, the Ganges Basin. This was not a planned migration but a desperate scramble for survival. Yet this very error, this failure to predict the river's wanderlust, accidentally rewired the subcontinent's entire economic map. Trade that had been confined to the Indus Valley was now forcibly injected into the heart of northern India. The overland trails they blazed became the foundation for new, permanent trade routes, facilitating an unprecedented exchange of goods, ideas, and people between two great river systems. The decline of one civilization in the West inadvertently seeded the rise of another in the East, proving that the most permanent-looking geographic features can be the most deceptive. This lesson in impermanence would be tested again, high in the jagged peaks of a mountain range that guards the roof of the world. High in the jagged peaks of the Pamir Mountains, a caravan master faced an impossible choice. Chinese silk merchants bound for the wealthy markets of Baksha had committed a grave miscalculation. They had profoundly underestimated the ferocity of the Taklamakan Desert's western passes, a place local guides rightly called the Sea of Death. Its shifting dunes and scorching winds promised certain oblivion for any caravan that dared to cross. With their original route now a death sentence, the traders were left with only one terrifying alternative: to ascend into the roof of the world. They turned their camels toward the towering, snow-capped ramparts of the Pamirs, a route every map and seasoned traveler declared utterly impassable for a trade convoy. It was a desperate gamble against geography itself. The climb was agonizingly slow, each step a battle against thin air and treacherous ice. Men and animals succumbed to the cold, their bodies left as grim markers along the trail. Yet, against all odds, they did not find a dead end. They discovered a narrow, wind-scoured gateway through the stone, the Karakoram Pass. This accidental discovery, born from a fatal error in planning, rewrote the map of global commerce. It created a direct, high-altitude bridge between the silks of China and the eager markets of Persia and Rome. Though it remained one of the most treacherous journeys on Earth, this new route became a legendary artery of the Silk Road, carrying not just goods but ideas, technologies, and cultures across a continental divide. A simple miscalculation of a desert's danger had forced humanity to conquer a mountain, proving once more that the most feared obstacles could hide the most valuable paths. This pattern of terror yielding to opportunity would repeat itself far from these frozen heights, on the vast, unpredictable expanse of the open ocean. Fear of the open ocean kept ancient mariners chained to the shore. For generations, Greco-Roman sailors bound for India would creep along the Arabian coastline, their voyages stretching into years as they navigated from one familiar port to the next, always keeping land in sight. The vast Indian Ocean was a terrifying mystery, a place of legends and monsters. The key to conquering it was not a better ship, but a fundamental misreading of the wind itself. A Greek navigator named Hippalus watched the seasonal monsoons with a trader's desperation. He saw these powerful, predictable winds not as a natural rhythm to be understood, but as a single, permanent gale to be outsmarted. His plan was audacious. He would point his ship into the open sea and run before this perceived storm, hoping it would blow him all the way to India. It was a colossal geographic miscalculation, a gamble that every seasoned sailor knew would end in disaster. But when he set sail, the expected tempest never came. Instead of a maelstrom, he found a highway. The very winds he feared carried his ship directly and swiftly to the Indian coast in a matter of weeks. He had accidentally discovered the secret of the monsoon cycle. His error revealed that these were not chaotic forces of destruction, but a reliable, seasonal engine for trade. This single misunderstanding shattered the old coastal routes forever. Direct open sea voyages between the Roman Red Sea and India became routine, slashing journey times from years to mere months. The economic impact was immediate and staggering. Roman ports were suddenly flooded with Indian black pepper, gemstones, and fine silk, goods that were no longer rare luxuries but increasingly common treasures. The center of the lucrative Eastern trade shifted almost overnight, moving away from the Persian Gulf and into the hands of Roman merchants. A navigator's failure to comprehend a natural phenomenon did not lead to his ruin. It unlocked the ocean, proving that the greatest barriers are often just misunderstandings of the world's rhythm. For centuries, the world's most trusted maps showed a landlocked Indian Ocean. The ancient geographer Ptolemy had drawn Africa curving sharply east to join a vast, unknown southern continent, a geographic dogma that became an unshakable truth. Navigators staring at these charts saw a dead end, a continental wall blocking any southern passage to the spice-rich east. This single line on a parchment, repeated for over 1,000 years, became one of history's most powerful trade barriers. It convinced kings and merchants that the route was impossible, leaving the lucrative flow of silks and spices firmly in the hands of Arab and Italian middlemen. Then, in the late 1400s, a Portuguese prince named Henry the Navigator decided to test the old maps. His captains, men like Bartholomew Dias, inched their way down the terrifying African coast, a place European sailors called the Green Sea of Darkness. They expected at any moment to be stopped by the mythical continent, but the land did not curve east, it kept going south. When Dias was blown around its southern tip by a ferocious storm, he did not find a continental wall. He found open ocean leading to the Indian Ocean. The ancient map was a lie. A decade later, Vasco da Gama would complete the journey, sailing directly to the markets of India. This correction of a millennium-old error did not just redirect a few caravans, it detonated the entire structure of global trade. The Venetian and Arab monopolies collapsed almost overnight. The economic heart of Europe shifted from the Mediterranean to the Atlantic, empowering new naval powers like Portugal, Spain, and later, England and the Netherlands. A single geographic miscalculation, trusted for generations, had held back the world until one brave voyage proved that the greatest barriers are often just lines on a map, a lesson that would soon apply to a misjudged island waiting in the Pacific. Monsters and myths were the most effective trade barriers of the ancient world. Arab and Malay merchants, who controlled the entire global supply of nutmeg and cloves from the Maluku Islands, wove a web of deliberate lies to protect their priceless monopoly. For generations, they sold Europeans maps that were masterpieces of misdirection, placing the Spice Islands in impossibly remote seas, surrounded by whirlpools and leviathans. They whispered tales of a boiling ocean and skies that rained fire to any ship that ventured too close. This was not a simple error. It was a strategic, cartographic deception designed to send rival traders on a wild goose chase into oblivion. And for a long time, it worked perfectly. European ships armed with these fraudulent charts searched in vain for the source of the spices, their voyages ending in frustration or disaster. Then came Ferdinand Magellan. He believed the lies, but he also believed he could outsmart them. His plan was to bypass the monster-infested routes altogether by sailing west from Europe, using maps that still drastically misjudged the size of the Earth. He was not searching for a new world, he was trying to sneak around a fictional one. His expedition, fueled by flawed data and sheer determination, did not find the Spice Islands where his maps said they would be. Instead, he stumbled upon the Philippines, and from there, his surviving crew finally blundered into the real Maluku Islands. The great secret was out. The sea monsters were gone, replaced by the most valuable trees on the planet. The merchants' clever lie had backfired catastrophically. By forcing Europeans to seek a backdoor route, they had accidentally guided them to the front gate. The floodgates of direct trade and eventual colonization were now thrown wide open, permanently wrenching the center of the global spice trade away from its ancient hubs and redirecting its flow westward toward Europe. A geographic falsehood meant to preserve a monopoly instead shattered it forever, proving that the most dangerous monsters are not those drawn on a map, but the unintended consequences of a perfect deception. The search for the Nile source was an obsession that consumed empires. For thousands of years, Egyptian pharaohs and Roman emperors sent expeditions south, convinced the great river began in a mythical range they called the Mountains of the Moon, a place of shimmering beauty and impossible distance deep in Central Africa. Their maps were filled with certainty about a location that was pure fantasy. These well-funded parties, armed with the best geographic knowledge of their age, would push upriver, only to be stopped dead by a geographic reality their charts had completely missed the sud. This was not a range of mountains, but an endless, mist-shrouded swamp larger than some countries, a tangled maze of papyrus and mud where the very water seemed to stand still. The Sud was a merciless, impassable barrier, swallowing men and their ambitions whole. Defeated by the swamp, these explorers could not simply turn back empty-handed. To justify their costly failures, they were forced to turn westward, away from the river and into the unknown African interior. There, they stumbled upon kingdoms they never knew existed, powerful states like Kush and Axum, rich with gold, ivory, and exotic animal skins. The trade contacts they forged in their desperation were not minor exchanges. They became permanent economic corridors. Goods that had always flowed north along the predictable Nile were now siphoned westward through these new overland trails. A river of ivory and gold began to bypass the ancient waterway altogether, reaching the Mediterranean through entirely new channels. The stubborn, repeated failure to find a single geographic truth did not halt commerce. It diversified it, weaving the interior of Africa into the global economy through the back door. Just as a mistaken desert crossing forged the Trans-Saharan trade, the futile search for a mountain that was not there built roads through a swamp no one could cross. A caravan master's greed for speed could be a death sentence in the go-by. Lured by rumors of a faster path, he would urge his camels away from the established, winding southern track around the Taklamakan, betting everything on a straight line across the gravel plains. It was a calculation based on hope, not knowledge, a fatal misjudgment of the desert's soul-crushing scale and its absolute lack of water. These shortcuts almost always ended the same way, with bleached bones and scattered cargo forming grim new landmarks on the empty horizon. Yet, over generations, these very trails of failure began to tell a different story. The graves of one caravan became a warning for the next, and the abandoned goods a cache for desperate survivors. Slowly, painfully, a web of these fatal errors was woven into a single, coherent path, a highway paved with misfortune. This became the Northern Silk Road, a route that did not just avoid the southern deserts but unlocked an entirely new economic frontier, the world of the steppe nomads. Suddenly, Chinese silk merchants were face to face with tribal horsemen, and a monumental exchange began, fine cloth for powerful warhorses. This accidental connection did more than move goods, it shifted the balance of power itself. The Chinese military, now supplied with the superior steeds of the West, could build cavalry forces that changed the very nature of warfare in the region. A shortcut meant to save a few weeks ended up rerouting history, proving that the most desolate mistakes can, with enough time and tragedy, be transformed into the most durable roads. Sometimes the safest road is the most dangerous one. For generations, Baltic amber traders clung to a single strategy, moving their priceless golden resin south on a slow, grinding overland trek. They believed this was their only option because the alternative seemed like sheer madness. They looked at the wide, powerful Vistula River and saw a chaotic waterway, impossible to navigate with heavy cargo. They gazed upon the Baltic Sea and saw a tempestuous gulf filled with pirates and unpredictable storms. Their maps and their elders' tales agreed. The land route through dense forests and past wary Germanic tribes was the sole safe path. This belief was a profound and costly miscalculation. The overland journey was not just difficult, it was brutally inefficient. Caravans could only carry small loads, and they were constantly under threat, forced to pay heavy tolls to local chieftains or risk losing everything to raids. The amber that finally reached the Roman elite was exponentially more expensive due to the immense effort and risk involved. Then, a few desperate or perhaps brilliantly reckless traders decided to test the old fears. They loaded their amber onto sturdy river barges and cast off into the current of the Vistula. They discovered the river was not a barrier but a highway. It carried their heavy loads for them, moving vast quantities of amber with a fraction of the effort. When they reached the coast, they did not find a pirate-infested wasteland, but a sea lane that connected them directly to the burgeoning trade networks of the south. This single correction of a geographic fear transformed the entire amber economy. The old, winding land trails were swiftly abandoned in favor of this new fluvial and maritime superhighway. This was the true Amber Road, a route that could supply Rome's insatiable demand for the precious resin on an unprecedented scale. The economic shockwaves were immediate. Cities like Venice, positioned perfectly to act as intermediaries, grew fantastically wealthy, processing and distributing the Baltic gold to the Roman world. A single misjudgment about the danger of water had stifled a trade for centuries, but the moment that fear was conquered, it unlocked a flow of wealth that shaped the destiny of cities and empires. This pattern of a single, corrected fear leading to monumental change would soon play out again in a far more volatile landscape. The Minoan civilization saw the island of Thera not as a threat but as a cornerstone. Their entire maritime trade network, a web of routes stretching across the Aegean, was built on the assumption that this neighboring island was a stable partner and a protective geographic shield. They established ports and warehouses on its slopes, confident in its permanence. This was a profound, civilization-ending miscalculation. The Minoans had catastrophically misjudged the volcanic instability simmering beneath the island's serene surface. Around the year 1600 BCE, that assumption exploded into a nightmare. Thera did not merely erupt, it detonated in one of the most violent volcanic events in human history. The cataclysm was absolute. It sent a tsunami, a wall of water taller than their palaces, crashing into the northern coast of Crete, obliterating the Minoan fleet at anchor in its harbors. The very geography of the sea was rewritten in an instant, with coastlines submerged and ancient sailing landmarks wiped away. The ash that fell for days choked their fields and blotted out the sun, triggering a climatic winter that crippled agriculture for years. The Minoan trade empire, the lifeblood of their society, was severed in a single day. For the scattered survivors who still possessed ships, there was no returning to the old routes. The central Aegean was a graveyard of mud and pumice. Their only hope for survival was to sail away from the devastation, to push eastward into unfamiliar waters toward Cyprus and the Levantine coast. This desperate exodus, a direct result of their geologic misjudgment, did not just redirect a few merchants. It forcibly injected Minoan maritime knowledge and trade goods into the eastern Mediterranean, inadvertently strengthening the very networks used by their rivals, the Mycenaean Greeks. The Mycenaeans, who had long watched from the mainland, seized this opportunity. They absorbed the scattered Minoan traders, adopted their ship designs, and took control of the newly vital eastern routes. Within a few generations, the Mycenaeans had not only taken over the trade, they had supplanted the Minoans entirely, becoming the new dominant power in the region. A single error in reading the stability of the earth beneath their feet did not just reroute trade. It erased one civilization from history and catalyzed the rise of another, proving that the ground we build upon can be the most deceptive map of all. The Incas built their empire on stone and sky. Their royal road, the Cuhapacñan, was a breathtaking feat of engineering, a web of highways carved directly into the jagged spine of the Andes. Suspension bridges swayed over bottomless gorges, and stone-paved paths clung to sheer mountain faces. This was a system designed for control, not commerce. The Inca miscalculated by prioritizing these high-altitude routes that connected their administrative centers and allowed their armies to move swiftly, while deliberately neglecting the more natural, efficient trails that wound through the warmer valleys below. To the Inca, those lower paths were a security risk used by local traders and potential rebels. They believed their mountainous fortress was unassailable. Then the Spanish arrived, Francisco Pizarro and his conquistadors, laden with heavy armor and reliant on horses and wheeled carts, found the magnificent Inca roads nearly useless. The steep, stone staircases were impossible for their animals, and the thin air at those altitudes left the invaders gasping. Forced to find another way, the Spanish turned to the very people the Inca had overlooked, the local traders who knew the old, forgotten valley trails. These unofficial routes, long dismissed by the empire, became the salvation of the Spanish conquest, and they led directly to a discovery that would change the world, the Silver Mountain of Potosi. Suddenly, the most urgent task in South America was to get that unimaginable wealth from the high Andes to waiting galleons on the coast. The neglected valley trails, wide and gentle enough for mule trains and wagons, were perfectly suited for this new, brutal economy. The Spanish did not just use these paths, they expanded them into the Camino Real, the Royal Road of Silver. This single geographic oversight by the Inca rerouted the entire flow of Andean wealth. The silver that had once fortified the Inca state now flowed down from the mountains, through the valleys the empire had scorned, and out across the Atlantic to fuel the economies of Europe. The heartland of the old empire was left economically sidelined, a testament to how a strategic miscalculation in terrain can hand the keys of global commerce to your conquerors. The knowledge that the world was connected was perhaps humanity's first great trade secret, and also the first to be utterly lost. For generations, the earliest peoples of the Americas carried with them the memory of a great land corridor, a frozen highway stretching back toward Asia. But as they spread across a new continent of staggering abundance, that memory began to fade. The story of the crossing became myth, then faded into silence. The descendants of those first explorers were left with a profound and lasting geographic miscalculation. They came to believe, as a matter of absolute fact, that their world was an island, completely severed from all other lands by impassable oceans. This was not an era of navigation, but of inherited knowledge. The Bering Land Bridge itself had vanished beneath the rising seas at the end of the last ice age, physically cementing this intellectual isolation. For thousands of years, this single forgotten truth dictated the fate of two hemispheres. It meant that the wheel, developed in Mesoamerica, never met the chariots of Eurasia. It meant that the rich metallurgy of the Andes never influenced the bronze smiths of China. The most profound trade routes are not those that are blocked, but those that are never even imagined. This was the ultimate redirection, a void where a global exchange should have been. While Eurasian empires were trading silk and spices and philosophies, the civilizations of the Americas developed in a breathtaking, parallel solitude, their achievements and tragedies unfolding on a stage the rest of the world did not know existed. This deep isolation, born from a memory gap, would stand until 1492, a stark reminder that a lost map can be more powerful than any mountain range. This stands in sharp contrast to another kind of error, one born not from forgetting a connection, but from desperately trying to force one into existence where nature never intended. Pharaoh Necho II envisioned a waterway to rival the Nile itself. In the 6th century before the Common Era, he commanded his people to carve a canal from the Great River to the Red Sea, a direct maritime shortcut that would bypass the Arabian Peninsula entirely. His vision was grand, but his understanding of the land was fatally flawed. He and his engineers had gravely miscalculated the sheer scale of the undertaking, believing the desert could be conquered with the bronze tools and human labor of their age. The project became a nightmare of sun-baked trenches and collapsing walls. Ancient historians would later report that the effort cost the lives of 120,000 workers, a staggering human toll for a ditch that never held water. The Pharaoh's Grand Canal was an unmitigated disaster, a monument to hubris and a geographic error etched in suffering. Yet from this colossal failure, a strange and unintended bounty emerged. To plan the canal's route, surveyors had been forced to map the eastern desert with a precision never before attempted. They charted every wadi, identified every hidden spring, and mapped a web of viable overland trails connecting the Nile Valley to the Red Sea coast. These paths were the project's forgotten blueprints. Generations later, Greek and Roman merchants, hungry for the spices and gems arriving from India, looked at the failed canal and saw something else entirely. They saw a ready-made land route. They used these very trails, the ones discovered through the canal's catastrophic construction, to establish a bustling overland trade. Goods from the Red Sea were unloaded, carried across the desert on the roads the Pharaoh's surveyors had mapped, and loaded onto barges on the Nile. This land bridge became a lucrative and reliable alternative to the long, dangerous sea journey around Arabia. A pharaoh's miscalculation, paid for in blood, had accidentally gifted his successors the precise geographic knowledge they needed to build a trade empire. The canal was a folly, but the maps it produced were pure gold, proving that the infrastructure of failure can sometimes outlast the dreams of success. A fleet so vast it could block out the sun, commanded by a court eunuch of unparalleled ambition, had already reached the coast of Africa. Admiral Zheng, his treasure ships were floating cities of diplomacy and power, projecting Ming authority across the Indian Ocean. Yet back in the Forbidden City, a very different calculation was being made. Imperial advisors looked at the staggering cost of these voyages and saw only a drain on the treasury, a series of expensive gestures that brought back exotic animals and strange ambassadors, but not the kind of silver that filled the imperial coffers. They fundamentally misjudged the value of the maps themselves, the priceless charts of currents, ports, and political alliances that Zheng he was compiling. In a decision that would echo for centuries, the Ming court ordered the greatest fleet the world had ever known to be dismantled. The ships were left to rot in their harbors, and the meticulously detailed navigational charts were burned, an attempt to erase the very knowledge of the wider world. This was not a simple budget cut, it was a profound geopolitical retreat. By turning inward, China voluntarily abandoned its role as the master of the Indian Ocean. The vacuum of power and trade it left behind was immense and immediate. Arab dhows and Indian merchant vessels, once operating under the shadow of the Ming fleet, now found the sea lanes wide open. Within decades, this commercial space would be spotted by Portuguese carracks, then Dutch and British East India Company ships, all rushing in to claim the trade networks China had so casually discarded. The flow of global influence, which had once stretched from Beijing to Malacca and beyond, was abruptly rerouted westward. The silver that Spain mined from the Americas would eventually flow to China for silks and porcelain, but it would travel on European ships under European terms. A single, short-sighted decision to value immediate treasury balance over long-term maritime dominance handed the keys of the next age of global commerce to others. It stands as a stark lesson that the most expensive knowledge is sometimes the knowledge you choose to destroy, a theme of lost potential that finds a haunting parallel in the sands of the Sahara. Gold could not quench the conquistadors' thirst for a different kind of legend. They had heard whispers from captured tribes of a king so rich he coated his body in gold dust, a ruler of a city called El Dorado. But in the retelling, the story warped. Spanish minds, shaped by maps of the Mediterranean, could not conceive of a great civilization without a great sea. They became utterly convinced that this golden city sat on the shores of a vast inland ocean, a South American Mediterranean hidden deep in the continent's heart. This was no simple mistake, it was a full-blown geographic fantasy, a miscalculation of epic proportions that would cost thousands of lives. Expedition after expedition plunged into the green hell of the Amazon and Orinoco basins, led by men like Francisco de Orellana, the first European to navigate the entire length of the Amazon River. He named it after mythical warrior women, seeing in every new wonder a reflection of the old world he desperately hoped to find. They endured disease, starvation, and attacks, all the while expecting the trees to part at any moment to reveal a sparkling sea. Of course, it never appeared. The jungle offered only endless rivers, not a single great sea. Their quest was a catastrophic failure in its stated goal. Yet, in their relentless, misguided search, these men were unknowingly drawing the first real maps of the Amazon's unimaginably complex river systems. They noted the confluence of mighty tributaries and the locations of indigenous settlements. The remote missions and forts they established as bases for their futile search did not vanish. Decades later, these very outposts became the foundational nodes for two entirely different and wildly profitable global trades. When the world developed a thirst for rubber, the paths blazed by the El Dorado hunters became the supply lines for latex extraction. When malaria threatened colonial ambitions, the same routes were used to locate and export the cinchona tree bark, the source of quinine. A desperate hunt for a phantom sea and a golden city did not find its treasure, but it accidentally sketched the logistical blueprint for extracting the rainforest's true wealth. A quest built on a complete geographic lie still managed to chart the very real economic future of a continent, proving that the most delusional maps can sometimes lead to the most tangible destinations. The Norse sagas sang of a land just beyond the western horizon, a place they called Vinland, where wild grapes grew in abundance and the forests were endless. For the Vikings in Greenland, struggling to farm in a marginal climate, this was not a distant continent but a nearby neighbor, a logical extension of their known world. They had gravely underestimated the true breadth of the North Atlantic. Their successful voyages were likely aided by powerful, unseen allies, the Greenland and Labrador currents, which acted as a hidden conveyor belt, speeding their longships westward. This accidental assistance created a dangerous illusion of proximity. They believed the return trip would be just as swift, a manageable voyage for a steady supply line. The reality was a brutal, open ocean crossing of thousands of miles, a gauntlet of storms and icy water that their slender ships and limited provisions were not equipped to handle permanently. The settlement at Elance Orcs Meadows was not a failure of courage, but a failure of logistics, a colony starved by the very distance their sagas had erased. Yet, in that brief window of contact, they accomplished what no Europeans had done before. They established the first transatlantic trade, loading their ships with the one resource Greenland desperately lacked: sturdy timber from the New World shores. This exchange, though fleeting, was monumental. The knowledge of this western land did not vanish. It was preserved in the epic poems and stories passed down through generations, a seed of possibility planted in the European mind. Centuries later, these very sagas would find their way to curious navigators in other European courts, men like Christopher Columbus, offering tantalizing proof that the ocean was not an endless void. A Viking miscalculation in distance, born from a misunderstanding of the sea's hidden currents, did not build a lasting colony, but it did draw the first faint line on a map that would later be followed by empires, proving that a route can be pioneered centuries before the world is ready to sustain it. Fear is a powerful cartographer, drawing boundaries where none truly exist. For over 1,000 years, the Rub al Khali, that vast sand sea known as the Empty Quarter, was the ultimate line on the map, a place marked only with skulls and the word impassable. Caravans laden with frankincense and myrrh would undertake journeys of months, tracing the entire curved coastline of the Arabian Peninsula. They accepted this immense detour as the only option, a necessary tax paid to the terrifying void at the continent's heart. Their miscalculation was one of absolute certainty, believing the dunes held nothing but death. But the desert was not empty, it was merely waiting for the right key. That key was not a new technology, but a new kind of partnership between the Bedouin and their specially bred camels. These animals were not just beasts of burden, they were living instruments of navigation, able to survive for days without water and sense the distant, hidden presence of an oasis. Guided by the stars and an oral map of the sands passed down through generations, the Bedouin learned to dance with the desert instead of fighting it. They discovered a secret web of routes through the towering dunes, connecting isolated springs and patches of grazing land that no coastal merchant had ever dreamed existed. This was not a minor shortcut, it was a geographic revolution. Suddenly, the incense trade had a hidden highway running straight through the belly of the beast. Goods could move from the production areas in the south to the markets of the north in a fraction of the time, completely avoiding the pirate-infested coastlines and the heavy tariffs of rival kingdoms. This clandestine network of trails did not just save time, it redirected the very seat of power. The wealth generated by this protected trade did not flow to coastal sultans, but inland to the Nabateans, who built their magnificent, rock-carved capital of Petra precisely because it controlled these new, invisible trade arteries. A barrier that had existed for millennia in the minds of merchants was transformed, almost overnight, into the most valuable thoroughfare on the peninsula, proving that the most forbidding terrain can become a sanctuary for those who learn its secret language. A lie can be a more powerful weapon than any fleet when it is drawn on a map. The Carthaginians, masters of Mediterranean commerce, guarded the source of their most vital metal with a cartographic deception of pure genius. Their ships returned from the misty northern seas laden with tin from Cornwall, the essential ingredient for making bronze, but they told their Greek and Roman rivals a very different story. They spoke of the Cassiterides, the Tin Islands, as a place shrouded in perpetual fog, surrounded by treacherous whirlpools and inhabited by sea monsters, located not in Britain, but in the dangerous waters off the coast of Spain. This was a deliberate, strategic miscalculation, a ghost placed on the charts to send competitors on a fatal wild goose chase. For generations, the ruse worked perfectly. Roman merchants, armed with these false coordinates, would sail toward the Spanish coast and find nothing but empty ocean or hostile tribes, returning convinced the tin trade was a myth too perilous to pursue. The Carthaginian monopoly remained unbroken, and the price of bronze stayed firmly in their control. But all lies have an expiration date. The Roman thirst for reliable metal eventually grew too great. A daring Roman captain, perhaps by following a Carthaginian ship at a distance or by interrogating a talkative sailor, finally pierced the veil of misinformation. He did not find monsters near Spain, but a well-established mining operation in the hills of southern Britain. The truth, once revealed, was explosive. The Roman Republic realized that the legendary Tin Islands were not islands at all, but a peninsula rich with resources and defended by tribes they could easily overpower. The discovery did not just break a trade monopoly, it triggered an invasion. The Roman conquest of Britain began, in many ways, as a direct result of this corrected geographic error. The flow of Cornish tin, along with British lead, silver, and iron, was abruptly and permanently rerouted. It no longer traveled on Carthaginian ships to the Mediterranean, but on Roman vessels directly to the continent, feeding the forges of the empire and starving its former masters. The very deception that had protected Carthage for centuries ultimately painted a target on the land it concealed, leading to its own economic decline and the full integration of Britain into the Roman world. A fictional island created to mislead became the very real catalyst for conquest. The great river flowed for centuries as a local thoroughfare, its true scale hidden in plain sight. The Mississippian cultures, with their magnificent mound cities like Cahokia, saw the mighty waterway as the heart of their world, a source of life and a conduit for regional trade. They transported shell, copper, and foodstuffs along its middle reaches, building a complex society upon its banks. Yet they made a fundamental geographic miscalculation, viewing the river as a centerpiece for their civilization rather than a continental highway that could connect two vastly different worlds. Their trade networks remained largely regional, a web of influence that stretched across the Midwest but never attempted to trace the river's full, epic journey from its northern whispers to its southern roar. When French explorer René Robert Cavelier, Sieur de la Salle, completed his famous descent of the river in 1682, he did not just map a new waterway, he saw a geographic logic that had been overlooked for millennia. His perspective was that of a global empire, and he recognized the Mississippi not as a local resource, but as the missing link in a planetary trade network. This single river, he realized, could connect the frozen forests of the Great Lakes with the warm ports of the Gulf of Mexico. His vision rerouted the economic axis of an entire continent. For generations, trade in North America had moved on an east-west pattern, with native trails and early colonial routes running parallel to the coast. La Salle's journey revealed a powerful north-south corridor, a natural superhighway that could funnel the immense wealth of the continental interior, especially beaver furs, directly to waiting ships. This new understanding did not just create a new route, it fundamentally redirected economic gravity. French outposts like New Orleans and St. Louis exploded into importance as vital hubs in this new system, while older, inland trading centers that relied on the old east-west path slowly waned. A waterway that had been a cornerstone for one civilization became the engine for another, all because a new perspective transformed a familiar geography into a revolutionary tool. This pattern of a landscape's potential lying dormant, waiting for a shift in perception, finds a dramatic echo in the sheer walls of a different kind of natural wonder. The sheer walls of the Grand Canyon presented a barrier more psychological than physical. For countless generations, Native American tribes like the Hopi and Navajo knew the canyon's depths intimately, using perilous trails to connect their mesa-top villages to the river below. Yet for large-scale trade, they saw the chasm as a definitive end, a geographic wound too vast to cross with laden pack animals. Spanish explorers, led by Garcia López de Cardenas in 1540, stood at the rim and made the same calculation. They saw an impassable fortress of rock, a 1,000-meter deep ditch that stole a full day's journey just to cross from one side to the other. Their maps and the assumptions that followed would cement this belief for centuries. Every major trade route, from the ancient paths of the ancestral Pueblones to the Spanish El Camino Real, swung in a wide, cautious arc either north or south of the canyon. This collective miscalculation of its traversability created a permanent gap in the economic map of the continent. The resources of the Colorado Plateau, its pottery, turquoise, and agricultural goods, remained largely isolated from the shell and macaw feathers of the Hohokam to the south. It was a blockade built not by kings or armies, but by the sheer, awe-inspiring scale of nature itself. The true integration of these regional economies had to wait for the 19th century, when figures like the Mormon pioneer Jacob Hamblin, learning from Paiute guides, finally charted reliable crossings. His work proved the canyon was a corridor, not just a wall, but the delay had cost centuries of potential exchange. This stands as a powerful testament to how a landscape's grandeur can intimidate us into drawing the wrong lines on our own maps, convincing us that the most direct path is an impossible one. That same human tendency to be misled by nature's power would next play out not on solid ground, but in the invisible, shifting currents of the air above it. Even the greatest navigators could be betrayed by a silent ocean. For the Polynesian voyagers, masters of reading stars, swells, and bird flight, the Pacific's doldrums presented a unique and terrifying miscalculation. These were not storms to be weathered, but vast, windless zones of utter stillness. A captain might judge the boundary of these doldrums incorrectly, believing he could skirt their edge, only to have his great double-hulled canoe drift helplessly into the dead center of the calm. The voyage would transform from a directed journey into a passive drift, the vessel becoming a prisoner of unseen ocean currents for weeks on end. With their sails hanging limp, the crew faced a slow agony of dwindling fresh water and provisions, their fate surrendered entirely to the sea's whim. These errors often ended in tragedy, with entire voyaging parties vanishing into the blue expanse. Yet sometimes the ocean's mercy was as unpredictable as its cruelty. A vessel caught in this drift might, after a month of despair, spot the faint, green smudge of an uncharted island on the horizon. This is likely how the most remote inhabited island on Earth, Rapa Nui, also known as Easter Island, was first settled. It was not the product of a planned colonization fleet, but the accidental discovery of desperate, lost sailors. These unintended landfalls did more than just save lives, they rewrote the map of the Pacific. An island like Rapa Nui, once settled, ceased to be an isolated speck. It became a new reference point, a potential way station for future voyages, however infrequent. The unique resources of these newfound lands, like the volcanic rock for tools on Rapa Nui, could enter the long-distance exchange networks that connected Polynesia. A navigational failure, a simple misjudgment of the wind's absence, could thus extend the tendrils of trade and culture by hundreds of miles, adding a completely unpredictable node to the world's greatest ocean-spanning civilization. It was a stark reminder that in the age of sail, a wrong turn was one thing, but a complete loss of the wind was another, a miscalculation whose consequences were written not in storms, but in an unnerving, endless calm that could either bury a crew or gift them a new home. Merchants saw the Tibetan plateau as a roof of solid ice, a geographic dead end where no caravan could possibly breathe, let alone profit. Every established Silk Road artery, from the northern Tian Shan route to the southern tracks skirting the Taklamakan, bent itself to avoid this colossal high-altitude fortress. The consensus was absolute, forged by the tales of those who had tried and failed, their stories warning of air so thin it starved the lungs and a cold that could shatter stone. This universal miscalculation, the branding of the entire plateau as a trade dead zone, created an unintended sanctuary of immense value, cut off from the mainstream flow of goods, the unique products of Tibet fermented in isolation, their rarity compounding with each passing year. Tibetan musk, a perfume base more potent than any other, became the stuff of legend in Chinese courts. Alluvial gold panned from highland rivers was whispered about in Samarkand's bazaars. Most importantly, Buddhist scriptures, translated and refined in the plateau's monastic universities, developed a unique and profound character untouched by the doctrinal debates of the lower Silk Road. When trade finally did begin, it was not a gentle seep but a sudden, precious trickle through a handful of terrifying mountain passes like the 20,000-foot-high Nangpa La. The merchants who dared these routes were not ordinary traders, they were specialists in survival, and their caravans were small, their loads incredibly light and incredibly valuable. This logistical nightmare created a perfect economic storm. Scarcity met insatiable demand. A single brick of compressed Tibetan tea, a vital commodity for the high-altitude diet, could be traded for its weight in grain. A small pouch of musk was worth a fortune in gems or silk. This niche trade, born from a collective geographic fear, became one of the most lucrative branches of the entire Trans-Asian network. And it carried more than luxury goods, it carried faith. The very isolation that had preserved Tibetan goods now made its form of Buddhism a rare and sought-after import, facilitating its spread into Mongolia and China, carried on the same yak trains that brought gold and musk. A land declared worthless by the world's most connected merchants had become a treasure trove for the few brave enough to recalculate its true worth. A lesson that the most forbidding geography often guards the most exclusive rewards. This pattern of a rejected place revealing its hidden value would find its ultimate expression far from these mountains, in a final, maritime miscalculation that sent ships toward a continent they never intended to find. An invisible wall of coral lay just beneath the surface of the Red Sea, a jagged, living fortress that tore the hulls from ships that strayed too close. For Egyptian and Roman captains, this was not a mystery but a constant, grinding fear. Their strategy was a cautious coastal crawl, navigating by sight of land to minimize the risk of a catastrophic strike. This was a profound miscalculation of the reef's true scope, believing that staying near shore was the only safe option. The result was a graveyard of splintered wood and lost cargo, as ships following this logic were funneled directly into the maze of coral that extended far beyond what any chart could accurately depict. Survival demanded a radical change in tactics. To escape the labyrinth, captains had no choice but to point their prows away from the familiar coastline and into the deep, open water. This desperate act of avoidance did not lead them into a void, but onto a hidden highway. Out in the deep channel, they discovered the powerful, predictable currents of the open Red Sea, winds that filled their sails with a consistency the treacherous coastal breezes never offered. What began as an emergency maneuver soon became standard practice. The route to distant African ports like Raptor, once a slow and dangerous journey of island hopping, was transformed. Now, ships could make the voyage in a fraction of the time, riding the swift marine currents directly to their destination. This accidental discovery did more than just save ships, it rewired an entire trade network. The volume of goods flowing between the Roman world and East Africa, ivory, tortoiseshell, and exotic animals, increased dramatically. Strong, lasting ties were forged with the Swahili coast, relationships built on the reliability of a route that was only found because sailors were forced to flee a danger they had initially underestimated. A navigational hazard properly respected did not block commerce. It forced the creation of a superior path, proving that sometimes the greatest efficiencies are discovered only when we are pushed away from the seemingly safe and familiar. A phantom king haunted the edges of every medieval map. For centuries, European cartographers were certain that a powerful Christian monarch named Prester John ruled a vast, lost empire, first hidden deep in the heart of Asia, and later conveniently relocated to the unexplored interior of Africa. This was no simple cartographic error. It was a collective act of geographic wishful thinking, a miscalculation built entirely from rumor, religious hope, and a desperate desire for a powerful ally against the Islamic world. The legend was so compelling that it launched real ships and funded real expeditions, sending diplomats and merchants on grand quests into the unknown with instructions to find this mythical kingdom. They sailed down the coast of Africa, their eyes scanning every river mouth for a sign of his golden cities. They trekked across the vastness of Central Asia, questioning every Khan and chieftain about the great Christian ruler to the east. They never found his palace of crystal or his river of gems, but in their tireless, misguided search for a fiction, they accomplished something far more valuable. They filled in the blank spaces on their own maps. They established the first direct diplomatic contacts with the very real and very Christian empire of Ethiopia, a connection that would last for centuries. They charted the flow of the Niger River and mapped the contours of the African coastline, turning terra incognita into known geography. The trade routes they established while searching for a ghost were not imaginary. They were the very arteries that began to link Europe directly to the wealth of sub-Saharan Africa and the kingdoms of Asia. A quest for a mirage forced the creation of a real, interconnected world. It stands as the ultimate testament to a recurring theme, that the grand redirections of history are not always born from careful planning or flawless logic. Sometimes the most powerful force shaping our world is a glorious, collective, and beautifully human mistake. Our journey through these 25 eras reveals a startling truth that the greatest leaps in commerce were rarely acts of perfect planning. They were acts of desperation born from a profound misunderstanding of the world. A wrong turn in the desert did not just lead to a lost caravan, it forged a golden road. A misplaced island on a map did not just send a ship off course, it shattered a global monopoly. The very flaws in ancient knowledge, the phantom lakes and the imaginary seas, were not obstacles to progress, they were its unlikely fuel. This was not a clean, orderly system of trade routes expanding with logical precision. It was a messy, chaotic, and deeply human process of trial and error, where a single miscalculation of distance or a misjudged ocean current could reroute the flow of empires. Each era forced a new adaptation, broke an old control, and pushed the boundaries of the known world just a little further. The interconnected globe we inhabit today, with its complex supply chains and instant communication, was not built on a foundation of flawless geographic data. It was built on a foundation of glorious, world-changing mistakes, proving that our ignorance has often been a far more powerful engine of discovery than our certainty. From the misplaced Pillars of Hercules to the legendary kingdom of Prester John, we have traveled across deserts, oceans, and mountains to witness how 25 geographic miscalculations accidentally rewired the ancient world's economy. These are not just tales of failure, but of fortune found in the most unlikely places. They remind us that human progress is rarely a straight line drawn by perfect knowledge. It is a zigzag path, paved with errors that lead to the most unexpected and magnificent destinations. The next time you look at a world map, remember that its lines were not drawn only by the deliberate hands of kings and conquerors. They were also sketched by lost merchants, desperate navigators, and hopeful explorers whose glorious mistakes helped to connect our world. If these stories of redirected fortunes have captivated you, we invite you to delve even deeper into history's greatest mysteries by subscribing for more content. And we would love to hear your own thoughts. Which of these ancient miscalculations do you believe had the single biggest impact on shaping our world? Share your perspective in the comments below.